The way we think of witches today is not the same way witches were seen in the 1600s. Witches are often thought of with an image of a hairy mole, big nose, not very attractive, using a cauldron, and riding a broomstick. However, at this time, so-called witches were normal people who dared to live their lives differently than the majority of Salem. This is their story. Mass hysteria is nothing new, as it has been prevalent for centuries. When I think about mass hysteria, I think about the satanic panic of the 1980s, which is similar to the hysteria involving witches. This particular hysteria goes back to the 1300s. In Europe, where religious individuals, including Christians, believed witches were people who were overcome by Satan and had the ability to harm others with mystical power. They were also thought to have changed shape and form. Over 10,000 people were executed in Europe because they were presumed to be witches, most of the accused being women. Men were also accused as werewolves around this time, which led to the werewolf trials. The witch execution continued in Europe for centuries, the last one taking place in 1782 in Switzerland. While the hysteria in Europe declined, it began to ramp up in Salem. There were two Salems at the time. The first was called Salem Town and now is just called Salem. Salem, the location of the witch trials, was known as Salem Village, now Danvers, Massachusetts. Salem Village, located 16 miles northeast of Boston, had a population of 500 in the 1600s. It was a modest farming town that had competed with the Salem town. The village was 10 miles inland from Salem town and rivaled with the richer, more populated Salem town. The rivalry hit its boiling point in 1689 when England and France fought over territory in colonial war, or the 7 Years' War. Residents fled to northern New York and Canada. By 1692, the village residents struggled financially on top of dealing with the epidemic of smallpox. On top of this, the colonists recently settled from taking the land from the natives, therefore they were dealing with the fallout from them, which they earned honestly. The overall weather was unusually cold at this point, lasting 50 years and year-long. Not only was it cold for the people of Salem, but it was creating hardships for food, as it was killing crops and stopping fish like cod from migrating to Boston due to cold waters. To get into the tensions that led up to the events of the Salem witch trials, we first need to discuss the feud of the Putnam and Porter families. These families were the richest families in Salem Village, therefore the most influential. The Porters were by far the richest family, owning 20,000 acres of land. Between three of the Porter brothers, Joseph, Benjamin, and Israel, they owned 3 out of 4 of the sawmills in Salem town. Basically, they lived in Salem Village, but made a lot of money providing the rival town with lumber. They showed support of an agreement between the two towns, but not everyone agreed. The Putnams had a real problem with the Porters' way of thinking. The Putnams consisted of John and his sons Thomas, Nathaniel, and John Jr. They had no business in Salem town and independently owned 800 acres of land. They had no benefits in joining the town and despised the agreement, seeing it as the church becoming more lenient and the congregation distancing themselves from God. In 1670, in Salem town, it was voted to build a town meeting center for the community to gather and worship. They wanted money from the farmers, but a lot of people were against it, as they did not want two towns to join because of the rivalry. The people against the union went to Boston to petition for an appeal. However, they were told it was between the two towns and to work it out, which ultimately took 2 years. In 1672, they agreed to allow Salem to bring in their own minister rather than traveling to the town to worship, but still had to go to Salem town for legal matters. In 1686, Thomas Putnam died, causing even more tension between the families. Instead of leaving his money to his children evenly, he left it all to his wife Mary, who was his second wife and mother of Joseph. He also had 8 other children from his first wife. Also, Mary was the daughter of Israel Porter, therefore the family money went to the Porters, which caused so much more drama. All of this sets the stage for what we now refer to as the Salem witch trials. This comes down to religion, as 1,000 Puritan refugees settled in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630. Puritans held the belief that the Church of England was too similar to Roman Catholics and their religion should be eliminated. They also believed that they had agreement with God to enforce these beliefs. Basically, Catholics tried to convert the Church of England, but the British left for America for religious freedom, including the Puritans. In Salem Village, Samuel Parris became the first Salem Puritan minister in 1689. Puritan families lived a very humble life. Homes normally had one room where the whole family slept, with a fireplace used for cooking and keeping the house warm. They would sleep in makeshift beds, and the room would often be smoky from using said fireplace as a heater. Children had more responsibilities than modern children, sharing responsibilities of working from sunrise to sunset alongside their parents. Men farmed, fixed things around the house, and cared for livestock, while women were expected to make soap, cook, garden, sew clothing. Men believed that they were the superior gender. Education and Bible study was taken very seriously, and if you were not working, you were expected to be in church. If you went against this belief, you would be punished, such as public whippings and humiliations. Basically, if you did not fit into this box of how a Puritan should act, you were a witch. Samuel was born in London, England in 1653. He moved his family to Barbados after his brother died and left his African slave plantation to him. When Samuel was 7, Samuel opted to attend Harvard instead of San English College, as it would be more true to his Puritan beliefs. He studied theology. In 1673, he ended up dropping out when his father died. He moved back to Barbados to take care of Thomas's estate as a sugar merchant. 2 years later, in 1675, things began to take a turn for Samuel. A hurricane hit the island and destroyed the majority of it, causing the sugar merchant to crash. In 1680, the island was struck with smallpox outbreak. He decided it was time to move on. Therefore, he admitted his time in Barbados has come to an end, so he moved back to Boston. In 1680, when he moved to Salem Village, he met Elizabeth Aldrich, who he eventually married and had 3 children together. He attempted to work as a merchant in Boston, but soon changed his path. In July 1689, Samuel Parris became the minister of Salem Village. Shortly after Samuel's arrival, he upsets the residents of the village. He became the minister and soon demanded a raise and ownership over property. A lot of people felt as if he was greedy and abusing his power. Samuel divided the town into 2 groups: people he allowed to take communion in the church and people who were not allowed. The people against him believed that his actions were the work of the devil. He soon took over this little village because at this time pastors had a lot of power. Then you add in his congregation. If you go against the pastor, then you risk becoming an outcast. The Porters refused to pay his salary as part of the Salem Tax Committee or give him firewood during the awfully cold winter. Samuel and Elizabeth lived with their children Betty, Thomas, and Susanna, their niece Abigail, and their slaves Tituba and John Indian. Abigail was living with the family after her family got killed by Native Americans during a raid. They relocated from Boston for Samuel to do his ministry work in Salem. Betty and Abigail would go missing for short periods of time with no explanation. Betty was 9 and Abigail was 11. I know the time was different back then, but surely this raised some concerns. Anyways, apparently they were practicing fortune telling and known religious beliefs at the time. This was worrying. The girls also conducted the Venus glass fortune telling technique, which is when raw eggs are poured into a glass to see what shape it makes. The girls conducted this experiment to see their futures, specifically their future husbands. But when they looked in the glass, they saw a coffin. This terrified the girls, and they began to act out a fear. This whole ordeal reminded Samuel of a family he knew in 1688 named the Goodwins. When he was living in Boston, Samuel was called to the family's home because their 4 daughters, having similar symptoms, and screamed about invisible hands torturing them. The girls claimed that they were attacked by the neighbor, Goody Glover. Goody was an elderly woman from Ireland who worked for the family as a housekeeper. Martha Goodwin, the 13-year-old daughter, accused her of stealing laundry, which led to an argument, and Goody cursed her. When the girls all became ill, Goody was arrested and charged with witchcraft and later hung. She was the last person hanged for being a witch in Boston. Although Salem witch trial happened a few years later, Samuel began to wonder if he was cursed, if that's why the family was acting strangely. In February 1692, the girls both developed some sort of strange illness. Betty began to hide under furniture, bark like a dog, and screamed in pain. She also dealt with a fever and convulsed her body into weird positions that humans normally don't get into. Abigail began to do the same things as Betty shortly after Betty's symptoms began. They claimed that they were bitten and pinched on their arms, necks, and backs. Samuel tried praying and used homemade remedies, but nothing helped. They called the town physician and a minister named William Greggs. William examined the girl, as they made no improvements but could not find no medical reason to explain this symptom, so he determined it must be something dark and evil. He believed the girls were suffering from bewitchment. Their diagnosis began the witch hunts of Salem. Rumors began to spread, and other girls were seen acting the same way. They would interrupt church services with screaming. Anne Putnam, Thomas Putnam's 11-year-old daughter with his first wife, would often spend a lot of time with Betty and Abigail. Thomas Putnam went by the home of Samuel to check on the girls, but after returning home, he told his family about what he witnessed. Soon after, Annie became afflicted with the same symptom as other girls. Although it's clear that she just replicated what he told her, he was convinced that the devil followed him home. It did not help that there was a major storm with rain and wind hitting the window panes, convincing him that the devil was trying to enter his home. The news of the bewitchment of the 3 girls began to spread throughout the town. People assumed that the girls were bewitched by someone or something. On February 2nd, 1692, Samuel and Elizabeth went to church to pray about the girls, alongside Tituba, John, and the family's neighbor and their friend Mary Sibley. Mary was a mother of 5 and wanted to help the girls. She remembered an old remedy to ailments that they were dealing with: a urine witch cake. Yes, you heard me correctly. A urine witch cake. This involves collecting urine from the affected and making a cake. The dog will then eat the cake, and if it starts showing the same symptoms, the girl was a witch. The girl's symptoms worsened with more convulsions and yelling about being attacked by a dark figure. Of course you're going to get sick when eating a cake with someone's urine. Therefore, it yielded no real answers. When Samuel and Elizabeth returned home, they were irate, and Tituba got the blame. Soon more girls began showing the same behaviors, and before too long, 12 girls were contorting the bodies, barking, and talking in weird voices. The entire Putnam family began showing these symptoms and telling everyone that they were suffering from bewitchment. By February 29th, Betty, Abigail, and Anne were pressured by Samuel to give the name of a witch who did this to them. This is when they pointed fingers at Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. They blamed their afflictions on Tituba and said that their specter was slapping and pinching them while laughing. She told Samuel that Mary made the cakes, which made the girls worse. He became livid that a Puritan could be evil in his mind and invited the devil to cure his daughters. Samuel called out another minister to help the girls, who then went back to their families and friends and told them about the weird occurrences. Rumors then began to swirl about darkness filling the Parris household. Fear began to fill the town of Salem. Tituba was Native American, but was said to be from New Spain, believed to be the Caribbean, specifically Barbados. She came with Samuel to Salem in 1680. When she was a teenager, it is believed that she married John, the other slave that lived with the Parris family. As I mentioned earlier, Tituba was Native American, and to put some perspective into it, King Philip's War ended in 1676, and there was still tension between the colonists and natives. Tituba became a main source of finger pointing due to her cultural difference from the colonists. Then other people started to claim they saw her doing witchcraft. After the witch cake fiasco, Betty and Abigail Parris accused Tituba of bewitchment, but she initially denied the claim because the girls were not old enough to be sworn in and testify. No charges were filed. Despite not being tried, Samuel punished her anyways. He began brutally beating her for weeks until she not only confessed to making the witch cakes, but also that she was a witch. On February 25th, Ann Putnam came forward with Elizabeth Hubbard, Dr. Gregg's servant. They claimed that Tituba was her and them using witchcraft alongside Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne. Elizabeth Hubbard said that she was walking into town to run errands for her uncle. When she had the sense of being followed, she began to walk home, increasing her speed, but she saw a wolf that resembled someone similar to her. When she arrived home, she told her uncle about the wolf and that it was Sarah Good. Elizabeth accused her and Sarah Osborne, whom she said was harassing her, of being witches. Sarah Good's father was a tavern owner named John Salat. In 1672, John took his own life when Sarah was 17. Now he did not have a will, therefore the estate was divided up to his wife and sons. The daughters were supposed to receive a small allotment from his money, but her mother's new husband forbade it. This left her in poverty. She ended up marrying Daniel Poole, an indentured servant, which is when a servant is contracted to work without pay. He died, and this left Sarah in a debt. She lost all the small amount of land she owned in a suit by Daniel's creditors. This left her homeless and destitute. By this time, she married William Good, but things were not better. They had no choice but to go door to door asking for money. She once knocked on Samuel's door with her child, but he turned them away. He heard her muttering something under her breath, possibly a curse. She was known for being unpleasant, whether she was given money or not. Samuel once gave her lodging for a short time, but became so volatile that he kicked her out. William, her husband, even had negative opinions on her, saying her demeanor scared him and disliked her failure of meeting expectations of a wife. All of this made her an easy target for allegations. Sarah Osborne married Robert Prince, John Putnam's neighbor and brother-in-law. The couple had 3 children, Joseph, James, and Elizabeth. He died in 1674, and shortly after his death, Sarah hired an Irish immigrant named Alexander Osborne. After he paid off his indentured servant status, he married Sarah. Robert shared his desire to leave his farm to their sons. Sarah ignored this and kept the land for herself and Alexander, which led to legal battles with her own children. This fight led her to struggle financially and develop tension with John Putnam. This undoubtedly led her to be accused later as a witch. On February 29th, the 3 women were arrested. By the next week, the storm passed, and Thomas met with the magistrates, Jonathan Hawthorne and Jonathan Corwin, in Salem. The Hawthorne family has been part of Salem since the founding of the village, as his father William was one of the early settlers of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Jonathan married one of the first settlers' granddaughter. He went on to build a successful shipping empire, so he was very influential. Jonathan Corwin was a descendant of a founding family who also was wealthy and took over his father's shipping business. Thomas let them in on the events plaguing Salem, and they felt as they had a duty to put back order in the town. They did not want evil to enter Salem town from Salem village. Witchcraft was a capital crime, making it punishable by death. But you'd have to show evidence when accusing people. Now, when people started accusing witches, they skipped past the proof part and started arresting people. Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne were all arrested and charged with witchcraft. On March 1st, 1692, the accused women were brought to the village meeting house, and they were interrogated for days. What happened in this time is not fully known, but it is possible they were being. Remember, it was 1692. Both Sarahs denied the accusations and were adamant that they were not witches. Tituba originally denied being responsible, but later confessed that the devil visited her. He bid her to serve him and described images of black dogs, red cats, yellow birds, and a black man who wanted her to sign his book, which she said she did. As creepy as that sounds, it is believed she made up this story to receive a lesser sentence. The girls were told that if they gave up a witch's name, then you could avoid getting hung. The 3 women were arrested and imprisoned for being witches. Eventually, on May 9th, 1693, the court found no merit in the accusations against Tituba, and charges were dropped. Samuel refused to pay her fines, and because she was enslaved, she stayed in jail until she was sold to an English settler. Nothing much is known about her life after that. During Sarah Good's trial, her accusers began to rock back and forth. One accuser even fell to the ground and pulled out a broken knife blade. She said that Sarah attacked her, but townsman spoke up and saying that it was his blade that she witnessed the knife breaking. The judge did not buy her story and told her to stop exaggerating the perceived truth. Tituba claimed that the Sarahs forced her to sign a dark book and that she set rats and other animals to attack the accusers. Sarah never wavered in her innocence, however, did blame Tituba and Sarah Osborne. Sarah was pregnant during this and gave birth, but the infant shortly died. On July 19th, 1692, Sarah Good was hanged. Sarah Osborne maintained her innocence the whole trial and never threw anyone under the bus. In May 1692, before the trial concluded, she died at the age of 49. Soon other women were accused of being witches, including Martha Corey, Dorothy Good, Rebecca Nurse, and Rachel Clinton. The community disliked Martha's husband Giles because he attended church at a halfway convent church in Salem town but attended the Puritan church in the village. They seen Giles as a hypocrite. Giles immigrated from England to Salem as a young man and settled at Salem Farms in 1659, which is located outside of Salem Village. He also had a bit of a temper and seemed to always be grumpy. He was known to get into arguments with neighbors and called them devilish rogues. He was also accused of stealing tools from neighbors' property. In 1675, Jacob Goodall, a farmhand, stole apples from Giles' brother, and Giles beat him to death. Jacob's death was ruled as murder, but Giles was ordered to pay a fine. His wife, Martha, already looked down at, as she was married once before Giles. Also, she gave birth to a baby out of wedlock, and it was thought that the baby was a mixed race. None of this is a bad thing or that would be that big of a deal today, but we're talking about Puritan times. She also married Giles when he was in his 80s, so there's a lot of talk about her marrying him for his money. Despite all her controversial choices, she was never an outsider. In fact, she was a member of the Puritan church, so she was considered authentic about her religion because we know how strict the church is. She did try to stop him from attending the trials. I think she knew if he continued to be involved with the trials, it was only a matter of time before she was accused of witchcraft. She even tried to stop him one day by unbuckling his horse's saddle and throwing it to the ground when he was getting ready to leave. He basically ignored her concern and continued to the meeting. Although Martha was respected in the church, Samuel Parris could not stand the couple. He had to see Giles every Sunday, present in the service, while he got away with murder. The complete opposite of a Puritan. Then Martha had divorced and had a baby out of wedlock. She also vocalized her disbelief in Abigail and Betty's stories. Remember, Betty was his daughter and Abigail was his niece. His opinion circled back to the girls, and during a Sunday service, the girls began to moan, sway, and throw themselves on the floor. Abigail pointed in the air and screamed that Martha was flying in the room. Martha, who was also present in the church, was shocked at the allegations. She defended herself but was arrested the next day. She was naive and assumed she would receive a fair trial, but she was wrong. Rebecca Blesson was the oldest of 7 children, including her younger sister Mary. In 1944, she met her husband, Francis Nurse, a tray maker, making wooden household goods. The couple had 8 children together. Rebecca was known to be devoted to God, and Francis was the town's constable. In March 1692, at 71 years old, she was accused by Edward and John Putnam of being a witch. She denied the claims, and the public was enraged by her being accused, as she was devoted to God and known to be charitable to others. Also, Francis was the constable of Salem, as I said before. Therefore, the family as a whole was well liked. She did have one enemy, though, Sarah Holton, who claimed that she cursed her husband, Benjamin Holton. Allegedly, the 2 women fought over trespassing pigs. Then Rebecca cursed Benjamin to death. He began having convulsions and eventually died. Originally, Sarah was convinced that Rebecca was the cause of Benjamin's demise, but soon came to her senses and even testified on her behalf. Rebecca's 2 sisters, Mary Easley and Sarah Coyce, was also accused of witchcraft. This next one is the saddest one of all. Ann Putnam accused Dorothy Good, Sarah Good's 5-year-old daughter. She claimed she saw Dorothy holding the Book of the Devil. They also said that she bit them and was acting like a deranged animal. Dorothy Good was questioned because she was nervous, then assumed that she was a witch as well and arrested. A literal child was arrested. She was never tried or found guilty. Unfortunately, she watched her mother give birth to her sister Mercy, the baby dying shortly after birth and her mother being taken to death. She did not have an easy life after her release. She went from living with different members of the Putnam family, even being a servant and having a baby young. She was arrested in 1722 and had another that was either conceived right before her detainment or during. She was transitioned later in life and is believed to have died in 1761 at the age of 73. Next, Anne accused Elizabeth Proctor, whom was a pregnant mother of 5. Her and her husband John were a wealthy couple who owned a local tavern. They were very respected in the village. Elizabeth specifically was known to be kind to everyone. Unfortunately, her grandmother was accused of being a witch 30 years before her. This left poor Elizabeth at a disadvantage in the community. She was always the subject of rumors and accusations. It must run in the family, they thought. If that was not getting people to talk enough, she also let natives drink at her tavern. This rang alarm bells for those close-minded Puritans of Salem, because they thought of natives as dark, soulless devil worshippers. One man that really hated that they were nice to the natives, and this was Giles Corey. He took the couple to court about the matter, but lost. He was irate about losing that he set their house on fire. This is when Mary Warren piled on the gossip and changed things for the worse. Mary was an 18-year-old orphan that the family took in as a servant. She would tell anyone that would listen that she was being mistreated by the couple. Once she heard whispers about Elizabeth possibly being a witch, she took this as an opportunity to get revenge. Now, I'm not saying that she did not have a reason to be upset. If they were treating her badly, that's awful. But however, people were getting hanged, so it makes it even worse, honestly. During Martha's trial, she asked the judge not to blame the girls who were present and insisted she was innocent and that there was no proof. The girls began to mimic her movements, saying Martha was possessing them. Mercy and Anne backed up their allegations. Mercy said that she saw a man whispering in Martha's ear, directing her to what to say. When John Hawthorne asked if the man was saying, Anne cried, that yellow bird was sucking on Martha's hand. They said that Martha tormented them for weeks to sign the book. This is when Martha asked what book they were referring to because she never showed them a book, nor did she purchase one. Martha was found guilty and hanged on September 22nd, 1692 at the age of 72 years old. This particular case was a turning point as she was the first person accused that had a good reputation socially and was well off financially. This proved the power of the families in Salem had and not to mess with them. Giles defended his wife and was tortured into confessing into being a wizard, which he refused to do. They tortured him by a method called peine forte et dure, or lying stone on the suspect's chest until they confess. This happened 3 days before Martha was hanged. It's suspected that he refused so he could maintain his will for his children. Rebecca Nurse was tried on June 30th, 1692, and while she was originally acquitted, she was retried and found guilty. She was sentenced and hanged on July 19th. She was denied a Christian burial, saying that she was not fit for it, and buried near her execution site. The family ended up secretly digging her up and buried her on their homestead. Her sister, Mary Easley, was also found guilty of witchcraft and hanged. Sarah Choice, the other sister, was accused, but her case was dismissed, and she was spared. On March 12th, Mary testified that she saw John practice specter floating near the Proctor home. Then it settled on her lap. John was furious and made it no secret that he thought all these girls were liars. He threatened Mary to start telling the truth or he was going to beat it out of her. Pretty extreme, but I think we could understand his anger given that his wife was unfairly executed and he was scared of the ramifications. He always said that the false accusers should be whipped and hanged. Again, he's very extreme. I understand his anger, but a lot of these women who lied did it out fair. They are victims of judgment during a strict society during this time. Both Elizabeth and John were found guilty and even given the death penalty. I need to mention that she was examined for moles and weird marks, but she had none. Elizabeth was given a stay of execution due to her pregnancy, but John was denied a stay and hanged. A petition that John started to stop the execution was taken seriously. However, it was after John was hanged, so it was too late for him. She gave birth to a baby boy and eventually released with 153 other wrongly accused individuals. Minister Cotton Mather warned that the spectral evidence or dreams and visions are not credible and should not be taken seriously. He was not taken seriously, though. His father, Increase Mather, who was the president of Harvard College, said all evidence should be equally credible, meaning dreams or visions could not be used. It would be better that 10 suspected witches may escape than one innocent person be condemned. The trials earned less and less support from the public, and spectral science was largely disregarded. By early 1693, the trials decreased, and by May, any surviving accused witch was pardoned and released. In January 1697, they did a day of fasting for the tragedy, even though the town did that and knew it was wrong. Soon the trials were declared unlawful and apologies began to happen. In 1711, legislation was passed to restore the accused reputations and provide survivors and families with financial restitution. Ergot poisoning is caused by eating infected rye. This theory is plausible because ergot is formed when there is bad winter or law rain. The plant contracts the ergot, developing fungus and replacing the rye shoots with a dark purple or black sclerotia. Most of the initial accusations can be explained by ergot poisoning, and the rest can be explained by public hysteria. However, this theory was dismissed because it is rare that a whole household wouldn't get sick and presumably ate the same food. Another theory is epilepsy, which is a brain disorder that causes seizures. Although this could explain convulsion-like fits, it cannot explain hallucinations. Also, a possible theory could be child abuse. Sometimes kids act out in weird ways when trauma is involved. Also, undiagnosed mental illness could have affected one or two kids and the other mimicked it, thinking it was a game. Sometimes kids do stuff like that when forced with the idea of bewitched or lying. They give names of other witches. Mass conversion disorder, formerly known as mass hysteria, includes vertigo, seizures, hallucinations. This can spread from person to person, affecting whole communities. It is thought that Tituba could have taught them about her culture, including voodoo, fortune-telling, and became fascinated but felt guilty due to religion. They also displayed guilt and acted out. There were over 200 people accused of witchcraft, so I could not discuss every victim. This is an awful case of how certain people are looked down upon and society turns against them. I do believe that maybe a few had mental illnesses or medical issues, or perhaps they were thinking outside of Puritan beliefs and was scared. I think certain adults took advantage of this and used the opportunity to get rid of people they did not like or people who questioned their views. What are your theories about what the cause of these so-called afflictions? Thanks for hearing about the history of the Salem witch trials. Comment, subscribe, and like. And if you have any cases you'd like to suggest, my Google Doc is in the description.